The Scout Who Found the Enemy, George Gay and the Miracle of Midway, 1942. I bet you've seen those historic maps and dynamic documentaries detailing the Battle of Midway, the clash that turned the entire tide of the Pacific War. But while historians often marvel at the strategic decisions of brilliant admirals, the real fate of the free world rested on the shoulders of terrified young men flying obsolete planes. In June of 1942, a young pilot named Ensign George Gay was about to launch into a mission that everyone aboard knew was a one-way ticket to a watery grave. George Gay belonged to Torpedo Squadron 8, or VT-8, stationed aboard the USS Hornet. Their mission was to find and attack the pride of the Imperial Japanese Navy, 4 massive aircraft carriers. But as their slow, heavily loaded TBD Devastator torpedo bombers took off, they had no fighter escort. They were completely exposed. Within minutes of finding the enemy fleet, the sky exploded into a wall of black anti-aircraft fire and deadly Japanese Zero fighters. One by one, George Gay watched his closest friends, the men he had trained and laughed with, get blasted out of the sky. The slaughter was absolute. Out of 30 pilots and crew members in his squadron, 29 were killed in a matter of minutes. George's plane was riddled with bullets, his radio man was dead, and his left leg was deeply wounded by shrapnel. Yet, bleeding and entirely alone, he pressed the trigger, dropped his torpedo, and crashed headfirst into the Pacific Ocean. Imagine floating completely alone in the middle of the enemy fleet, bleeding from your wounds, with nothing but a rubber cushion over your head to keep from being spotted and executed. This wasn't a movie. It was the terrifying, lonely reality for George Gay. But wait, because the most unbelievable part of this entire miracle hasn't even appeared yet. Guard this detail because it will change how you view this battle forever. George Gay was about to witness the most critical 5 minutes of World War II from the worst seat in the house. Visualizing George's situation is almost impossible. To avoid being shot by Japanese machine gunners, he hid under a floating black rubber cushion left over from his sinking plane. As he bobbed helplessly in the water, the massive Japanese carriers circled right around him. He could hear the chaotic shouting of Japanese sailors and the heavy thud of their engines. He was a ghost floating in a sea of enemies, fully expecting to drown or be captured at any second. But then, the sky began to rip apart. At exactly 10:22 a.m., just as the Japanese were preparing to launch their own planes to destroy the American fleet, American Dauntless Dive Bombers appeared out of the clouds like avenging angels. Because George Gay's Torpedo Squadron had drawn all the Japanese fighters down to sea level, the sky above was completely empty. The American dive bombers had a clear, unobstructed shot at the deadliest targets in the Pacific. From his front row seat in the water, George Gay watched a literal miracle unfold. Within just 5 minutes, 3 massive Japanese aircraft carriers, the Kaga, the Agony, and the Soryu, were transformed into burning, exploding infernos of twisted steel. Debris rained down into the water just yards from where he was floating. The very fleet that had devastated Pearl Harbor was being dismantled right before his eyes, and he was the only American alive there to see it. As the sun began to set over the Pacific, the roaring battleships retreated, leaving George Gay alone once again in the freezing, pitch-black ocean. The physical pain of his shrapnel wounds was nothing compared to the crushing psychological agony that settled in. He knew the truth. He was the sole survivor of Torpedo Squadron 8. Every single brother he had flown into battle with that morning was gone, resting at the bottom of the sea. For over 30 hours, George fought against exhaustion, dehydration, and the constant threat of sharks. He drifted aimlessly, clinging to his raft, waiting for a rescue that felt impossible. Finally, a Navy PBY Catalina patrol plane spotted a tiny speck in the vast ocean. They landed on the water and pulled George Gay out of the sea. His physical battle for survival was over, but his mission to keep a legacy alive had just begun. When George Gay was brought to a military hospital, the High Command was desperate to hear his story. He met directly with Admiral Nimitz, providing vital intelligence about the destruction of the Japanese fleet. But George didn't want fame or a safe ticket home. He carried a heavy, sacred burden for the rest of his life. He had to be the voice for the 29 brave men who never made it back to the Hornet. George Gay lived to see the end of the war, authored a book, and spent decades honoring the memory of his fallen squadron. He proved that sometimes, a hero's greatest mission isn't just winning a battle, but surviving to ensure that the sacrifice of those who fell is never forgotten by the next generation. When he passed away in 1994, his final wish was granted. His body was cremated, and his ashes were scattered out over the ocean at Midway, reuniting him forever with his squadron. The heroes of the greatest generation gave everything so that we could live in a free world. If you believe that the incredible survival of George Gay and the ultimate sacrifice of VT-8 deserve to be remembered, hit the subscribe button, leave a comment to honor our veterans, and join us on our next journey through history. Thank you for watching The Greatest Generation Tales.